Tuesday's proceedings. May I ask our religious leaders to offer some prayers. Imam C, you have the floor, please.
أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين الرحمن الرحيم مالك يوم الدين إياك نعبد وإياك نستعين اهدنا الصراط المستقيم صراط الذين أنعمت عليهم غير المغضوب عليهم ولا الضالين وإن تستفتحوا فقد جاءكم الفتح نصر من الله وفتح قريب وبشر المؤمنين بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم قل والله أحد الله الصمد لم يلد ولم يولد ولم يكن له كفوا أحد بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم قل أعوذ برب الفلق من شر ما خلق ومن شر غاشق إذا وقب ومن شر النفاثات في العقد ومن شر حاسد إذا حسد بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم قل أعوذ برب الناس ملك الناس إله الناس من شر وسواس الخناس الذي يوسوس في صدور الناس من الجنة والناس إن الله وملائكته يصلون على النبي يا أيها الذين آمنوا صلوا عليه وسلموا تسليما صلى الله تعالى عليه وعلى آله وصحبه وسلم تسليما سبحان ربك رب العزة عما يصفون وسلام على المرسلين والحمد لله رب العالمين.
Amen. Thank you very much, Imam C. Bishop, you have the floor, please.
Thank you, Chairman. Lord God of all creation, you who create the whole world and who made human being in your image and in your likeness, we thank you for the nations of the world, and we also thank you for this nation, the Gambia, the smiling coast of Africa. We pray, Lord, that as we are hearing spread across this nation will touch the hearts of those who have been hurt. Your reconciliation power will go forth to reconcile the people of this land. Your forgiving power will stretch forth throughout the length and breadth of this nation to touch the hearts of those who had been seriously, whose human rights have been seriously tampered with. The Lord, they will, by your goodness and your mercy and your grace, have the heart to forgive those who tortured them. By your reparation power, Lord, you who is the owner of all good things, the wealth of this world, that you will make the provision so that there will be adequate reparation for those who need it. And as we continue to seek out the truth, may the truth come out, and may your people be nourished and be benefited thereby. In Jesus' name we pray, praise and thanksgiving. Amen.
Amen. Thank you very much, Bishop Udiko, for that. And Council, I believe we're continuing with witness from yesterday afternoon. You have the floor, Council.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman, Commissioners, and members of the audience. We are continuing with the witness for yesterday, Mr. Saikou Jammeh, Secretary General of the Gambia Press Union. Welcome back to the TRRC, Mr. Jammeh.
Thank you, Council.
Are you able to continue with your testimony?
Yes.
And thank you for your willingness to come again, that is the second time, to continue with your testimony. May I remind you that you are still under oath and that you are expected to speak the truth and only the truth. Are you ready to proceed?
Yes, Council. Thank you.
Yesterday, before we closed the day, you testified about several things, including what is the GPU all about, its mandate, its achievements, and the problems the media has encountered during the Jammeh era. We talked about, or you gave an overview of the human rights violations that journalists suffered during that period. You also talked about the general environment for the media during that time. And you significantly made reference to Gambia being ranked as third from the bottom, only ahead of Eritrea and some other country, I can't recall which.
Equatorial Guinea.
Equatorial Guinea. Jammeh chose very well where to go. I mean, as the two countries that had a worse human rights record for journalists as compared to the rest of the world. Certainly, that is not a position to be admired or to be envied or to be bragged about. Hence, we are here. You also started giving us a description of the various violations that occurred, especially categorizing them to the to type of violations. You talked about murder or the killings of journalists. Therein we discussed two killings, Mr. Barrow and Mr. Dela Haidara. And you talked about enforced disappearances. There we talked about the disappearance of Chief Ibrahim Amane, who has not been seen up to this day. We also talked about the torture of journalists, and we talked about 13 incidents of torture. Does that characterize what happened yesterday?
Correct, Counsel.
So we still have a few more issues to deal with. One would be the Arson attacks against media houses. Then the arbitrary closures of media houses and broadcast media. And the deportation of media practitioners. That should actually go in tandem with the exile of Gambian journalists. Then we have to deal with the arbitrary arrests, physical assaults, and harassment of journalists. And finally, we would have to deal with the repressive laws that were put in place in order to help Jammeh achieve what he wanted to achieve. Are you ready to discuss those?
Yes.
So now let's talk about the arson attacks against media houses. Could you tell us about that?
Well, I think the first arson attack came about in 2001, and then it was on Radio 1 FM. Radio 1 FM was owned by Uncle George Christensen. Uncle George Christensen has now passed. I think he passed in 2016. And Radio 1 is so important to the Gambian media because this was the first private FM station we have not only in the Gambia but in Africa as a whole. Before, radio stations were broadcasting mainly on SW and MW. So Radio 1 was quite a landmark in the history of journalism in the Gambia. And Uncle George, a very amazing person, started some radio current affairs programs on the radio. And one of those programs that became quite popular was the Sunday morning news hour, where a lot of issues were discussed, including, political issues and some economic issues that were quite topical. So we believe that Radio 1 was targeted as a result of that particular program. And then Uncle George sustained some severe burns during the attack. Yes. And then some of his equipment were damaged.
Did you, by any chance, learn about any individuals who were accused or alleged to have committed the attack on FM?
Unfortunately, no, because the state has even never investigated this matter.
Do you know whether there's been calls for an investigation in this case?
Calls by the Gambia Press Union did make calls for investigation into this case, but it has never been investigated.
Has the radio station been reopened since then?
The radio station started operating afterwards, but eventually it voluntarily shut down because I think they could no longer recover. They could not recover from the attack because shortly after the attack, then the radio station started doing less and less of those kind of current affairs programs.
Do you know why?
I think it's because of the attack.
Fear?
Yes.
That the attackers could come again?
Well, yes, because shortly after the attack on Radio 1 FM, one of the staff there, Aluba, who was also a DJ, who was known as Mixmaster, this was also in 2001. One night he was sleeping when he woke up the following morning and he found a letter, in his house, on the doorstep. And they were warning him that, had it not been for the child that he was having in his house, they were going to burn him that particular night for his engagement with Radio 1 FM, because Aluba was also quite active on that program and on Radio 1 in general. So Aluba, at the end, I think, had to leave the country.
He too went into exile?
Yes.
Is that letter that was sent to Aluba or delivered at his home, did it identify who was going to make that attack on his house?
Some of the letters are quite anonymous. It was quite commonplace at the time for journalists to receive those kind of threatening letters. Some of them are quite anonymous. They are anonymous letters, but this particular one was claimed to be from the Green Boys, if I could remember quite well.
And do you know who the Green Boys are, or who are claimed to be the Green Boys?
Well, the Green Boys were mainly thugs, would describe them, a youth movement that was created by the former president, Jammeh, to support him. But then they also carried out a lot of atrocities.
And those atrocities were carried out for the benefit of who?
For the benefit of the regime of Jammeh.
Good. Was this the only arson attack on a media house, as far as you know?
No. Independent newspaper in 2004 was also attacked. This was a very serious attack on Independent, because when they came, they tried to lock the staff that were working inside so that they could get burned. And they set the machine, the printing press of the Independent, on fire because they came with some gasoline and then they poured it around and they set it on fire. So what eventually happened was that one of them dropped his pistol, and there was a staff there, Namori Tarawale, I think he was the head of production at the time, who found this pistol and gave it to the police. Lamin Cham, okay.
The staff that was locked into the building, what happened to them?
Some of them did sustain some burns. Some of them escaped, without having any major injury at all. Yeah.
But there were no fatalities?
No fatalities.
That's right. So the printing press was damaged, the staff escaped, some with burns, and one of the staff, Namori Tarawale, found a pistol in the premises. And what happened to that pistol? So
Namori surrendered this pistol to the police. And Lamin Cham testified yesterday, and he said that this was the pistol that Data Hydra took photograph of and published on the Point newspaper the following day. And then we do know also that in that year, Hamad Ba, who was in National Assembly at the time, then he was leader for the National Reconciliation Party, still the leader, but he was a National Assembly member. He took to the floors of the National Assembly and named Sana Manjang as one of the people that took part in that attack. And
in fact, he named 3 individuals, Sana Manjang, Sirif Gise, and Khalifa Bajinka.
Yes, those were the 3 people that he named as the people that were behind that attack.
Of course, this is hearsay evidence, but we would want to imagine that Mr. Ba wouldn't just plug these names and bandy them at the National Assembly. He definitely would have had some good information. Whether that is actually correct or not, we don't know, but we should not take it lightly. These 3 individuals, do you know in which institutions they worked?
They were at the time working at the Presidential Guards.
And the Presidential Guards were those who were responsible for protecting Jammeh?
Yes.
So now we have these 2 arson incidents, Radio 1 FM being the first on 10 August 2001, and Independent newspaper on 13 April 2004. Were there any other ones as far as you know?
An arson attack also happened with Ibrahim Silla. This was also in 2004. Ibrahim was the correspondent for the BBC, but we all know that he cut his teeth in journalism at Citizen FM. And Ibrahim was sleeping when they came at night, and then they set his house on fire. He was inside, his wife was inside, his kid was inside. He luckily was able to escape, and then afterwards he went into exile also.
Did he also receive one of the letters that they would customarily send?
Yes, Ibrahim did receive a letter, but not only Ibrahim. I think also Demba Jao also received a letter from some green boys telling him that he should warn his journalist that very soon, these days, one of these days, they are going to teach, one of them a lesson for the way they were criticizing the former president.
And the letter to Mr. Silla, according to the dispatch from the GPU, indicated that the Green Boys would not sit idly by to see that their president is criticized unnecessarily.
Yes.
And that they warned, they gave him a final warning, and that very soon they would teach him a lesson for all journalists to know.
Very well.
That was the warning given to Mr. Silla.
Yes.
But, all these things were claimed to be done in the interest or benefit of Yahya Jammeh. Was this publicized in newspapers?
Yes, these cases were publicized in the newspapers. In fact, perhaps when we got into the methodology of how we gathered all this material, I can talk about it. Yeah.
Please do so. Perhaps this would be a convenient point. It would set more light in what is to follow.
Oh, okay.
And then we take it from
there. Okay. So all these cases that we have, for us, as far as we are concerned, we take this commission and its entire process with utmost seriousness. We had meetings with the Justice Minister before the setting up of the commission, and when he told us that this was something that was going to happen, we then thought this was a very credible option for us to come and seek answers to the many questions that we've had over the years, and also to pursue justice, because in all these cases that we are talking about, or we will be talking about, we have not had any justice in any of them. So when the commission was set up, we eventually came here and had a meeting with the executive secretary, of course, to offer our support to the process, but also to see how best we could engage with the commission to seek truth and also pursue justice, like I said. So we then had a lot of interactions with the director of research, and we sent out the forms that were provided to journalists, media practitioners, anyone that we felt was a victim. We circulated the documents quite widely. We told them to come and give true and accurate account of what happened to them. But nonetheless, we also went about with newspaper research, trying to find out what happened in the past. And as the Secretary General, of course, I was very much involved in that, and I led that process. But then what we also did was that in order to independently verify these things that we put in this table that I told you, we hired the services of Emil Toure, who was a president of the GPU, to cross-check them, because Emil had been here for quite a while, to cross-check our findings and say whether this is actually accurate or that is not accurate. So those kind of work was done. But majority of the cases also, when we were making some submission of affidavits to the ECOWAS Court of Justice, this was essentially some of the things that we submitted to the ECOWAS Court of Justice. So that was the methodology that we used. I mean, I come in here to make this testimony doesn't mean that I am the most prominent journalist. I'm not even, as you can see, I'm very inexperienced, and there are more experienced people, and then our hope is that a lot of them will now come and then give true and accurate account to what happened to them and what they had witnessed happen to their colleagues.
Well, Mr. Jammeh, you may be very young, but you make us have great confidence and faith in journalism in the Gambia by reason of the way you have acquitted yourself and also journalists that practice in this country. Thank you very much for everything and for demonstrating so much knowledge and confidence in what you have to offer. From what you have just said, the information that you're talking about is information that is gathered from various sources, including the journalists who are actual victims of the issues you talked about, correct?
Very well.
Good. So now we have talked about the killings. We've talked about the enforced disappearance, and we have concluded also the arsons. Let's talk about the arbitrary closure of media houses. I know, Mr. Jammeh, that what you have to talk about is so much. Mm-hmm. It's not just possible or even fair to really test one on all this information without reference to anything. So feel free at any point in time to refer to the tables that you have, to refer to the material. I too would do so extensively. This is not a memory test. Okay. If that were the case, I mean, you have definitely vindicated yourself. So we are all mighty impressed. So you can refer to the material as much as you want, okay?
Thank you.
So now, arbitrary closures of media houses. Could you tell us about that? First, the general environment, what was happening, and then we would go into the individual cases. Thank you.
Well, I think in total we have about 15, if I get it right, incidents of arbitrary closure in total. They involved a number of media houses. Sud FM was one of them, Citizen.
Yes, those arbitrary closures, you said 15 of them. Mm-hmm. Do you know whether any legal process was taken before these closures?
There was no legal process in all of them except one, which was the Citizen FM case in 1998. But in the rest, no due process was followed.
In a sense, you are suggesting that somebody somewhere just arbitrarily decided that this media house must be closed down.
Well, the modus operandi of these people that do this was that mostly you will have one or two or three operatives of the National Intelligence Agency who will walk into the offices and tell them to either cease publication or cease broadcasting. So that's what they were doing. They will say that they've received orders from the top.
And what do you understand that to mean, orders from the top?
Well, orders from the top Well, of course, it's orders from the presidency. I mean, yeah, Jammeh himself said that once, that actually, I mean, the only office, people usually say orders from the top, but his office is actually the topmost office in the country. The only office that is above his office is the office of God. So, well, I think this is, top means the office of the president.
But of course, in fact, the NIA was part of the office of the president.
Yes, yes.
So they would only take their orders from the president.
They will take their orders from the president. In fact, one of the letters that I saw, correspondence from the NIA, they will, the letterhead says that office of the president.
That's right. And these closures, you said 15 of them. Which area of the media suffered the most?
The broadcast media suffered the most because, like I explained yesterday, they didn't want radio to do quite well in the Gambia because they wanted to keep people in the dark. So the broadcast media suffered the most.
And were there any particular programs that were targeted for this, as far as you know?
Yes. I mean, the particular programs are mainly programs that are about reviewing of newspaper stories in local languages. So I talked about the fact that they've allowed the newspapers a certain degree of freedom. So when a newspaper publishes something, that's not a problem. When a radio station picks that newspaper and reads it in local languages, then that's a problem.
It is okay for the few who can read and write to understand what is contained in the papers, but it's not acceptable for the masses, those who can't read or write, to know exactly what's happening.
Definitely.
Now let's talk about those closures you mentioned. You said there were 15 of them. The first was the Independent, or one of them was the Independent. Mm-hmm. Can you tell us about that, a closure that was ordered by the Ministry of Justice?
Yes. They actually, I wouldn't remember the exact date for that particular one. Could you?
27 July.
Yes.
1999. Yeah.
In this particular instance,
please refer to the material if you must.
Yes. What happened was that they told them to, some NIA officers visited the Independent newspaper, their office, and then told them to cease operations because they were not legally registered. Of course, the editors there at the time, Alaji Yoro Jallo and Baba Gale Jallo, were able to prove that they were registered. But then they came again and said, no, you didn't register your business with the Commissioner for Income Tax, and so you shouldn't publish until you regularize that status. But then the following day, Alaji Yoro went there to register to regularize the paper status with the Commissioner of Income Tax, and he was told that actually the Commissioner of Income Tax had received orders not to register the paper. But then I think a week or two later, then they finally allowed them to regularize their status, and they resumed publications.
So that refusal, the initial period of 1 week, or the hiatus of 1 week, was viewed as unlawful pretty much because it's a denial of registration.
It was.
And the next one was Sud FM, when the NIA stormed their offices on 17th October 2005. Could you tell us about that one?
This one was a bit controversial because we do not know exactly why Sud FM was shut down. But what we do know was that about 48 hours before the Sud FM station in the Gambia was shut down, the Sud FM station in Senegal was shut down. And Jammeh had just visited the Senegalese president at the time, and he returned. So upon his return, then that was when orders were given for Sud FM Gambia to be shut down. But the Sud FM in Senegal was shut down for only a day and then reopened. We don't know why Sud FM in the Gambia So we just try to, make some connections.
But in these clauses, don't they really give reasons as to why?
No, they don't give reasons. They just say it's orders from the top.
And Citizen FM, 23rd October 2001, you talked about that earlier, Babu Kargay. So tell us more about it. What happened? Citizen
FM was shut down twice. The 2001 closure happened shortly after was in fact during the presidential elections in 2001, because Citizen FM was broadcasting the results of the 2001 elections.
Was that live broadcast?
Yes, they were doing that, and the Independent Electoral Commission had said that they were the ones who were supposed to do that. No media house was allowed to broadcast the results, but Citizen FM went ahead and they were broadcasting the results of it. And as a result of that, they were closed. And when they were closed that time, they were never opened again. But then this was the same election when Ousseynou Dabo, the leader of UDP, when he testified here, he said he believed that he was cheated in 2001. But the 1998 closure of Citizen FM actually came about. I think there's a background to the story. The background was that there was a Congolese diamond dealer who was coming from DRC, and then he was given diamond and money by a lot of Gambians to come to the Gambia when he was coming. So when he came, he was intercepted by the security forces, I think the NIA to be specific, who took the money and the diamonds from him, and then they told him to go back. But to the man, he would have rather died than go back, because when he goes back, then how was he going to explain to the people that this was what happened to us? And then our understanding is that a lot of media houses at the time were approached by this gentleman to publish the story, but a lot of them toned it down until he met Citizen FM, Babakar Gay, and then Babakar Gay gave him a platform. But I understand they even had an interview with the NIA who confirmed the story, that they took the diamond and the money from him and gave it to Jammeh. So Citizen better not publish that particular story. So they defied it, and then they went ahead and broadcast it on Citizen, but also it was published on New Citizen, because Citizen had a sister newspaper called New Citizen. But what we do know is that when they came to close Citizen FM, what they said was that Citizen FM refused to register with the under the Telegraph Act. So they eventually charged the Citizen and its owner to court, at a magistrate's court. The court actually decided in favor of the state that Citizen had violated the laws. But then when the matter went to the High Court, on appeal, then the High Court overturned the ruling of the magistrate's court.
In fact, the conviction was on a very trivial or flimsy violation. The fine was no more than $300 at the time.
Yes.
But the conviction was overturned at the High Court.
At the High Court, yes.
But Citizen FM, Citizen, the paper, ceased operating from 1998, didn't it?
Yes.
And then the station continued operating until 2001 when it was finally shut down.
Yes.
And what happened to Mr. Babukar Gay?
Babukar Gay, I mean, I have never met actually Babukar. Like Data, I have never met him also. I mean, they both died before I joined the practice. But I read his work. I came across, I found him to be, I think, one of the most intelligent journalists the Gambia has ever had. And he died in 2007, in October 2007, really, yeah.
But as far as you can recall, Citizen FM never went back on air. after 2001?
Yes, in fact, what happened after the closure was that the security personnel came and they barricaded the compound, so they wouldn't let anyone to go in. Even the compound owner struggled very hard to have access to his compound.
And their crime was live broadcast of election results.
Yes.
We've never had live broadcast of election results again until 2016.
Yes.
And 2016, what happened?
Well, Jammeh got defeated.
Maybe there was reason not to do live broadcast. So now let's talk about the independent again in March 2006.
So this was when the NIA again came and they arrested some staff, including the managing director at the time, Malik M.K. Sise and Musa Sedikan. The two were tortured during their detention there for 3 weeks. When they shut down Independent from that moment on, the paper remained closed.
It looks like the Independent suffered quite significantly in terms of arrests and closures. Then we have the Standard newspaper, that was 2010.
Yes.
Do you recall that one?
Yes, the Standard is actually owned by Sarif Bojang Jr., Sarif Bojang, who came back from studies. He was, of course, at the Observer, where he also served as editor and managing director at various times. So when he came back, he set up Standard, and after a few publications, then he received orders from the Office of the President, NIA, that he should stop publication. In 2011, during a meeting with media chiefs at State House, that was the first ever, actually, a meeting that Jammeh had ever had with media chiefs. Then, at the end of the meeting, that Jammeh announced that he was actually ordering the reopening of Standard newspaper, and that was how it happened.
So he knew Standard newspaper was closed?
Well, yes, he knew.
And he ordered its reopening?
Yes.
There was no legal process?
Yes.
Now let's talk about Teranga FM.
Well, Teranga FM was closed down more times or more than any other media house. I think 4 in total. They were first shut down in 2010. That was when they started reviewing newspapers in local languages. When they were shut down, they were told not to do that program. And they were reopened, I think 6 months later or so. And when they were reopened, they were told specifically, I mean, I had seen that letter myself, because when the editor went to NIA to receive the letter, I met him, and then I saw the letter. They specifically told him not to do that program.
And they were also shut down, as at the time the 9 inmates of Mile 2 were executed. Do you recall that incident?
Yes, the 9 inmates, I mean, it was after this incident that some of us started sitting down and trying to, put the puzzles together. Because what happened was that the NIA went after the scholar Bakausu. They wanted to arrest him, and he escaped. Of course, they had him before and they tortured him. But this time, he escaped. And it was the same day that they went to Teranga FM and they ordered them to stop operations. I think 2 weeks later, then the killing of the 9 inmates. Of course, 8 of them were death row inmates, but the 9th one was on life imprisonment. So they killed those people. So when they killed those people, already Teranga FM was shut down. And then in September, then they came after the Daily News and the Standard and shut down those 2 papers, because there was a spirited debate in the media. Some were even saying that, Jammeh and, his people should be, sanctioned. And these were carried by these papers, and then they eventually shut them down.
From what I have seen, it looks like any criticism of Jammeh would lead to an arrest or a closure of a media house?
Well, yes, I think this particular one, in fact, was very much calculated. Because I think the reason they targeted the imam was that he was so vocal on human rights issues, and he was going to speak about it. So they targeted him, and the imam ran away. But they also targeted Taranga, because at the time, Taranga was still doing the local news review. They thought that perhaps if the newspapers had just carried what happened, then, I mean, if no radio was carrying it, then it was going to be fine. So Taranga was closed about 2 weeks before that particular incident. But when the incident happened, and 2 weeks or 3 weeks down the line, they saw that actually the media was still on this thing, and they came and shut down 2 newspapers.
Interesting. And then the last one, in 2017, at around the impasse, what happened?
Well, 2017, what happened was it was like an uncaged bird. I mean, because when Jammeh lost elections, all the radio stations that were not doing serious current affairs programs, they all started broadcasting news, and they were talking about all the things that people were talking about. And of course, Jammeh had already lost elections, but he was still in town. And then they received orders from the NRA to cease operations.
Paradise FM closed?
Paradise FM, Hilltop, Afri Radio, and Taranga.
Taranga the 4th or 5th time?
The 4th time, yes.
That's right. So you also suffered deportation or exile of media practitioners. Let's first talk about the deportations. It looks like soon after the coup, deportations started. Could you tell us about that?
Yes, the first deportation happened in October 1994. They came in July, August, October. Kenneth Best was deported.
And who was Kenneth Best?
Kenneth Best was the founder and proprietor of the Daily Observer. And I must also say that, I mean, foreign journalists or non-Gambian journalists working in the Gambia had played a very crucial role in the development of the journalism industry. We all know that Radio Seed was the first private, and Radio Seed was set up by someone who was in the Gambia, and I think a Swede. And then Kenneth Best established the Daily Observer, and Daily Observer became the first daily newspaper in the Gambia in 1992. Of course, in 1991, The Point was there. The Point wasn't daily at the time. It got to a point now, anyone you meet, you know, even if you are having The Point or independent, people will tell you, let me read your Observer. So that's the kind of impact that these foreign journalists have on journalism in the Gambia.
Was it known, the reason for deporting him?
Kenneth Best, of course, was someone who wouldn't waver on his journalism principles, even after the change of government, and the environment was hostile, because it was a similar situation that he ran away from in Liberia, where he's from. And then he was running an Observer in Liberia. I mean, he's still running that paper now. So he came to the Gambia because of threats on his life in Liberia. So he came and established Observer here. So he wouldn't waver on his editorial principle.
How about Chemo Cisse, a Sierra Leonean, in 1995?
Chemo was also deported. We don't know exactly the reason for his deportation. But yeah, he was also one of the people that were deported.
But this was a time when Sierra Leone was still at war.
Yes. In fact, Kenneth was also returned at the time when Liberia, when the guns were still not silent there.
There is also Chikuluba Kenechukwu, a Nigerian.
So Chikuluba was quite popular for his commentaries at the Observer at the time. and we don't know exactly why he was deported, but then he was quite influential at the Daily Observer at the time.
They took him to Kaulak,
Yes, they took him to Kaulak, yes.
and then what happened?
Well, they told him to get off the car, and then they handed him his passports and told him to get lost. I mean, the immigration officers did that in Kaulak, yeah.
Interesting way of deporting someone. Let's talk about Mohammed Saidi, a Ghanaian, Mohammed Ellicott Saidi, a Ghanaian.
Yes, Mohammed Ellicott Said was the editor of the Daily Observer at the time. And then, of course, he also had a Gambian wife. And we don't know exactly why he was deported, but we do know that he was also quite influential at the Daily Observer at the time.
And this was in November 1997.
Yes.
And Mohamed Mboyo, a Congolese who arrived in Gambia.
Yes. Mohamed Mboyo, yeah. So they actually deported Mohamed Mboyo to Nigeria, even though he was from the Democratic Republic of Congo. And then he showed them his papers that he was from Congo. But then what we do know also was that Mohamed Mboyo was, well, he was part of the presidential press corps of Mobutu in DRC. But then
And Mobutu Sese Seko,
yeah,
the former president.
the former president, yeah.
Right.
Yeah. So when the change of government happened there were some threats on his life, so he had to run to come to the Gambia here.
And Sule Musa?
Sule
Nigerian?
Musa is quite funny because this was a Nigerian also working at the Daily Observer at the time. I think what happened was that Sani Abacha, the president, also a dictator in Nigeria, had died. And Sule Musa kind of celebrated that, you know. So as a result of that, he was deported. What we do know was that there were some pro-Abacha and anti-Abacha faction within the Nigerian community at the time. So what we are told is that some of his, Nigerian friends reported him to the High Commissioner in the Gambia, who eventually reported him to the Gambian authorities. But I mean, I understand he was also quite critical of the High Commissioner at the time because, he was often referring to the High Commissioner as the High Commission for propaganda for Nigeria. So he was quite critical, yeah.
And he was deported back to Nigeria.
Yes.
But of course, we knew that there was a close relationship between Jammeh and Sani Abacha at the time.
Yes.
So, just to go back a little to Mohamed Mboyo, the dispatch received from the GPU suggests that he was tortured at the NIA headquarters before he was deported. Is that right?
Yes.
Now let's talk about Ibrahim Ernest, the Sierra Leonean, who was also deported on 27th September 1995. Do you remember that one?
Yes.
He used to work for The Point. Yes, tell us about it.
Yes. The Point newspaper published a story that there was a riot at the central prisons, the Mile 2, and as a result of which some staff were arrested, including Ibrahim Ernest and Pap Sen. I couldn't remember the third one, but 3 of them were arrested. They were charged to court, prosecuted, and luckily for them, they were acquitted and discharged. Notwithstanding, Ibrahim was deported afterwards.
It looks like there was a lot of deportation in the early days, from 1994 to 1998. Is that a correct observation?
That's very right.
So now let's talk about the arrests and detentions.
Mm-hmm.
Your dispatches reveal that there were how many arrests and detention? 140 arbitrary arrests and detention between 1994 to 2016. You can refer to your materials.
Yes.
Should be page 22.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
How many? 140 arrests and detentions?
And still counting. 140 and still counting.
Because you have not received everything yet.
Yes. Matter of fact, yesterday when I walked in here, one of the staff of the Trrc, Ibuwage, told me about his latest arrest. I told him, but I didn't capture that in here. Yeah. So, and it's 140 and still counting. This means that, I mean, across the 22-year period that Jammeh was here, a journalist was arrested at least once every month. That was how terrible it was. At least once every month. And in most cases, when you are arrested, you get detained in an arbitrary fashion. Sometimes you get harassed. Sometimes you get intimidated. Some of them were not lucky enough. They got tortured. And we still know about Chief Mane, who has disappeared. We don't know what happened to him. Yeah.
And some deported.
Yeah,
or sent into exile.
Some deported, yes. Yes.
There were some who were, for some reason, were arrested more times than everybody else. Alaji Yoro Jallo and Baba Gale Jallo.
Yes, Alaji Yoro Jallo, Baba Gale Jallo, Alaji Mbai, Lamin Dafe. I mean, all of them independent newspaper. These were people that, I mean, it's quite incredible. I mean, these people are very strong people, because if you look at the pattern, I mean, it's like hardly a week goes by without someone from independent being, I mean, arrested or invited for questioning.
In spite of the constant harassment of the independent, they
yes.
remained resilient and they stood there and did the work, correct?
They did. Independent being the kind of paper that it was. Yeah, they did.
And in spite of the many arrests, they still remained there working.
They remained there working.
Jallo and Baba Gale.
Yeah, they remained there working.
And Alaji Mbai.
Yeah, and Alaji Mbai. It got to a point that I think between 2000 and 2006, almost the entire management of the independent newspaper, I mean, had left the country.
Is it this Baba Gale Jallo?
Well,
or another one?
Well, he's looking at me right now.
Okay. Interesting. We have to go through all these arrests and detentions simply because as victims it is important that they get recognition for their victimization, and it is important also for the public to know what has happened to the media and the personalities during the period. It would be difficult, it may be boring for some, but this is important. So we have to go through these 140 instances of arrest. So we crave the indulgence of the audience and everybody to let us go through this, because this is very important.
Sure.
And the first one, from maybe 12 days after the AFPRC,
yes.
On 4th August 1994, Sidia Jatta and Halifa Sallah of the Foroya. Tell us about it.
Well, they defied the decrees of the junta to ban political expression, and they went ahead and published the Foroya newspaper, and as a result of which they were arrested, prosecuted.
That was decree number 4, wasn't
yes,
it?
Decree number 4. It was Halifa Sallah and Sidia Jatta, yeah.
They were subsequently convicted,
yeah,
but the sentences were suspended, if I could recall.
Yes, very
That's
well.
right. Okay, yeah. And then the next was Kenneth Best. We have dealt with that on 21st October 1994, when he was arrested and also deported. And allegedly he published some articles that were critical of the junta, right?
Yes.
In fact, this was perhaps an arrest before the deportation.
Yes. Yes.
And he was detained for 36 hours, and he was advised to be careful with what he chose to publish, correct?
Yes.
And then Ibrahima Sankare in November 1994. He too was arrested for criticizing the government via a letter to the BBC, correct?
Yes.
And you can refer to your material. Tell us about Abdullah Savage in
Yes.
November 1994.
Yes, Savage was reporting for the Daily Observer, and he was arrested and he was also beaten up. Yeah.
Just to situate this in the evidence that has been received thus far, Mr. Chair, you recall we've received testimony about a journalist who was beaten at Fajara barracks when the journalist went to obtain a report with regards to the PPP politicians and demonstrators who were detained at Fajara barracks, the MC Champs, the OJ Jalos, and so forth. So this Abdullah Savage pertains to that incident. Now let's talk about the newspapers that were banned, the publications for newspapers from or by the National Printing and Stationery Service.
Yes, they actually ordered the printing corporation not to print newspapers, private newspapers. Of course, it was printing the government-owned newspaper.
I know you were 10 years old at the time, but tell us what significance or why was it important at the time for printing, as we used to call it, or the National Printing and Stationery Corporation, as they later changed it into? What service was it providing to the print houses, and why was this ban significant?
The technology that the media houses were using was quite old. In fact, the Point newspaper was the first the first tabloid that started this computerized system of publishing newspapers, and then followed by the Daily Observer. So before, all the newspapers that were publishing on mimeograph, and the Gambia printing press had at the time a more modern equipment that afforded quality printing services to the people, but also affordable for the because it's government owned, also affordable for the print houses. The private ones that were existing were pretty expensive for them, and a lot of the media houses don't have their own printing press, so they do the printing with the National Printing Press. Yeah. And
when this ban came, what effect did it have on the printing press?
I mean, I wouldn't be able to tell exactly with any significant detail what effect it will have. One thing I will know is that one of the things that it might have on the press is that the quality of the newspapers will be affected greatly, and the timely nature in which they deliver services to the people will also be affected quite well.
And the cost of production.
And the cost of production, yeah.
And for some of them, really, the place to print their paper was no longer available. They have to go looking for some other place that would accept a contract to print for them.
Very well, yeah.
So this was a major setback for those newspapers that did not have their own printing press.
Yeah, it was a major setback. Actually, printing press is a target for them. We know about the Independent attack. It was the printing press, a newly one that was bought by Independent, that they targeted, and then they set it on fire.
Now let's talk about Babukar Sankanu of The Point, arrested and detained.
Yes.
For reporting on Voice of America.
Yes.
And it's point number 6 on your dispatch.
Yes, I've seen it.
He was detained incommunicado for a week and interrogated.
Mm-hmm. Well,
And,
yeah,
yes.
he did give a report to the Voice of America um, about the failure of the junta to return the country to civilian rule, which didn't go down well with them, and he was arrested and detained.
Criticize Jammeh, you get arrested and detained,
Yeah.
or tortured,
Yes.
or exiled, or deported.
Yes. Correct.
Number 7, Chikeluba.
Yeah.
We talked about him.
We spoke about him. Yeah.
He was deported, right?
Yes.
Now let's talk about, well, he's had a running with the authorities. I mean, on more than one occasion, isn't it?
Chikeluba.
Yes.
Yeah, at first he was arrested and detained and questioned, and then later they called him back. They arrested him again, but this time they, deported him.
And then 6 May 1996, Aliou Badara Sow and Bruce Asemora, they were arrested and detained incommunicado for 16 days. Could you tell us more about that?
Well, they were arrested by plainclothes police officers for an article that they wrote about fraud at the Gambia police. So they were held incommunicado for 16 days. Well, I am pleased that Bruce himself is in the hall. I think so. He was here yesterday. I have seen him around earlier. Yeah.
Interesting.
Yeah, Bruce is in the hall.
Wonderful.
Yeah.
Wonderful.
Yeah, and yeah.
Interesting. And the police demanded that they disclose their sources of information.
Yes. Yes, police demanded that they disclose their source of information. In fact, that was quite a routine for them. Oftentimes when you publish something that they don't like, even if it is corruption, rather than investigating what happened, so they will tell you to tell them who the source of that information.
But isn't it a cardinal principle that that is privileged information or confidential information that should not and cannot be disclosed?
Well, yeah, in journalism, the ethics are very clear. You rather die or go to jail than disclose the source of your confidential information.
And that was not to be recognized by the NIA or the Gambia police at the time of Jammeh?
No.
Interesting. Let's move on to 13 June 1996, Ansumana Baji of The Point, and arrested at Soma for criticizing the AFPRC.
Yeah, I mean, Jammeh, by constitution was required to have a countrywide tour twice every year, and we do know that these tours are meant to familiarize himself with what is happening in the country, in particular with respect to the farming community. It was a practice that was that he inherited from the Jara
Used
government.
to be Meet the Farmer Store.
Meet the farmer store, yeah.
Okay, tell us about it.
Yeah,
Continue.
so yeah, it was a practice that he inherited from the Jammeh, from the Jara government. But we do know that these stores are politicized, because most times, they will be talking about political issues and not about the situation that the farmers were facing. So this particular reporter wrote a story about the politicization of the tour, and for which he got arrested and detained.
Alaji Yoro Jallo again of the Independent. I must tip my hat for him. He's been arrested too many times, and this one was in 1997. Alaji Yoro Jallo and Aliou Badara Sow, and they were arrested and detained for a week for publishing stories of a riot at the prison. Is this the same arrest as Ernest?
Yes.
Ibrahim Ernest?
Yes.
In which he was deported?
Yes.
So you also don't criticize or say things about the prison, is that right?
Well, yes. I mean, you don't. It was very unpredictable as to what the regime would like or not like.
And then Mohammed Elikot Said, the Ghanaian journalist with a Gambian wife, he
Yes.
too was arrested and deported.
Mhm.
Okay, and Citizen FM, of course, Babukar Gay and Ibrahim Asila,
Yes.
they were also arrested. And Babukar Gay charged under the Telegraph Act,
Yes.
convicted, fined for $300,
Yes.
and the conviction was subsequently overturned.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
So 26 April 1998, Daily Observer. This was a raid at the Daily Observer, right?
Yes.
And what happened there?
Well, they raided the offices and then they arrested about 5 technical staff there. I mean, this was early hours, and it was the production team that was mainly there. There were about 5 Gambians and 2 Senegalese who were there. So they arrested them and they released them.
9 June 1998, Sule Musa, the guy who was deported for celebrating the death of Abacha.
Yes.
Interesting. Then 30 August 1998, Theophilus George, Andemba Jao of the Daily Observer. I think they were arrested, according to your dispatch, for publishing an article about a wall that had collapsed at State House due to rainfall or something. And they get arrested for that too?
Yes, in fact, the reporter also got arrested. That's the subsequent one. Geran Senghor was arrested, and Demba Jao and Theophilus George were also arrested for that
Just
particular
for writing that a wall had collapsed at State House?
Well, yeah, they thought that was some sensitive story, so.
Okay. Lamin N.B. Dafe, the reporter who went to the police station to ask questions about arrest of differently abled non-Gambians.
Yeah, I mean, I think to put context to this particular one, there was a time when I think Jammeh himself made some public statements about this, about the fact that you have a lot of non-Gambians in the country who are differently abled, and they are the ones who beg in the streets. And at some point, they were rounded up, these beggars, and sending them away. This reporter was inquiring about that particular incident, and he got arrested for it.
And again, Alaji Yoro Jallo and Baba Gale Jallo. This one, 1st August 1999. I'm sorry, Baba, we can't have you to come and testify. So just sit there and nod. Please, please go ahead.
Yes, Alaji and Baba, I mean, this was when the Independent was first ordered to cease operations because they didn't regularize their status with the Commissioner for Income Tax.
And this is the first time I have ever heard that a government would refuse to collect tax that a person wants to pay.
Yes.
But interesting. Then Sirif Bojang, editor-in-chief of The Observer, and Aliu Badara Sow. And this was in September 1999. And they were taken to the NIA regarding the helicopter that came to Kanilai. You remember that publication?
Yes, Aliu Badara actually was the reporter in this instance, and Serif was the editor. Yes, so they reported that a helicopter, Senegalese helicopter, had circled the native village of President Jammeh, and then there were some gunshots, and then they got arrested for it. Yeah.
Were they eventually charged?
Were they?
Eventually charged with
No,
any crime?
no, they were never. In fact, in a lot of these cases, I didn't have enough time to actually look at that quite well, but then I estimated that in a lot of these cases, more than half of them, they were not even charged at all. More than half of the 140 plus incidents of arrest and detention, they were not charged.
Interesting. Mohamed Mboyo, we've dealt with his case. That's the Congolese who was deported to Nigeria.
Yes.
Even though they knew that he was from the DRC.
Yes.
Okay, Madi MK Cisse, he too must have been arrested more than once. He's the reporter who talked about Ousseynou Dabo being ahead in the 2001 presidential elections, wasn't it?
This was, I think Ousseynou Dabo testified about this particular one.
Okay, this was the murder of Ali.
The murder of Ali Njai, yes.
Yes, please go ahead. Tell us more about that.
Well, Madi happened to be on that tour as a reporter, but when they arrested people in connection with the killing of Ali Njai, he was also arrested and charged with murder.
Wasn't it known that he was just a journalist?
It was
attached to the group, reporting about their activities.
It was known that he was a journalist and a reporter, for that matter, with the News and Report magazine. I think eventually the charges against him were dropped.
But nonetheless, he was charged with murder.
He was charged and prosecuted, and he made a few appearances before the courts.
Interesting. And again, Alaji Yoro Jallow and Baba Gale Jallow.
Yes.
And this time, they were questioned about their nationalities.
Yes.
Can you tell us more about that? That's quite extraordinary.
Well, I don't know how to explain this, but then it was quite, we discovered this to be also quite commonplace at the time. When they know that they've tried A, B, C, they can't get you, then they try and, cook some, some other things. And among those things that we were doing was the issue of citizenship. I mean, so Baba and Alhaji were particularly victimized for that. And also Uncle Papsen was victimized. Even Deda Hydra was also victimized.
So if you have a last name that is international, that you would find in more than one country, the assumption is you're not Gambian.
Yes.
Interesting. And again, July 2000, Baba Gale Jallow and Alhaji Mbai. Baba must have been a regular client. Your lawyer must have made a lot of money. And this time around, what happened? They were released on bail for $25,000, wasn't it?
Yes.
And they were taken to the serious crimes unit.
Yes.
And what was the issue? The issue was about hunger strike at Mile 2 prison.
Yes.
Interesting. And on 28 February 2001, we have Saliu Mbai.
Saliu
Mbo, excuse me, Saliu Mbo. Yes, this is the person whose house was searched at 2 a.m.
Yes.
And police carrying tear gas and everything into his home.
Definitely. I mean, when you look at the tactics used by our law enforcement agencies, sometimes it's quite, you don't know, like it's like it's like these are infiltrated by people, and then because you couldn't imagine a police officer taking a tear gas to someone's house, a journalist for that matter.
But also being searched at 2 a.m.
At 2 a.m., yeah.
Extraordinary. And Omar Bah and Lamarana Jallow, Babukar Sise and Pamodu Bojang, staff of the Independent and the Daily News respectively. This was 13 March 2001. And according to your dispatch, they were reporting about demonstrations by taxi drivers over increase in fare.
Yes.
Vis-a-vis the increase in the prices of fuel.
Yes.
And they were harassed by the police and their notebooks taken away from them and torn.
Yes.
And cameras confiscated.
Yes.
Interesting. 31st March 2001, Alkinki Sanyang and Lamin Diba, who were physically assaulted.
Yes. Alkinki in Kiang during the by-election there, and also Lamin Diba during the by-election in Kiang. In Badibu, yeah, in Badibu.
And on 27 June 2001, tell us about that one.
That has to do with Aliou Badara Mansare, a Sierra Leonean journalist who was reporting for the Daily Observer. He was physically assaulted by the police, who arrested and detained him, in Bundung.
And on 12 July 2001, Omar Ba?
Yeah, Omar was also assaulted during while he was covering the trial of this man, Landin Sane.
Who was a commander of state guards?
Yes.
Alleged to have committed or planned to commit a coup.
That's very right, yeah.
And 18 July 2001?
That was Alajim Bai, also reporter for Independent. He published a story about an ex-APRC supporter who said that he was going to expose the atrocities of Baba Job, now late. Baba was the majority leader of the National Assembly at some point, and
so he was arrested for suggesting that he was going to publish an article critical of Baba Job.
Yeah, in fact, he interviewed an ex-APRC supporter who said he was going to do that.
Interesting. 10 August 2001, again Alhaji Mbai?
Yes, he was detained by the NIA, who actually arrested him. He reported that there was fraud during the presidential elections because he believed that some people from Casamance in southern Senegal came into the country to vote for Jammeh.
Interesting. 23rd October 2001, George Christensen, proprietor of Radio 1 FM. We talked about this one, didn't we?
Yes, we talked about it.
Yes.
I mean, it was after the attack that he was arrested and then detained. Of course, they were asking him about who was sponsoring his radio station.
His radio station was burnt, and then they arrest him to question him about who was sponsoring his burnt radio station.
Yes.
That's a good one. Interesting. And that burning, that arson was never investigated?
Never.
There's no report published by the government or anything?
No.
He received no compensation about the burning of his radio station?
Nothing.
And Alhaji Mbai again? No, we dealt with, yes, Alhaji Mbai again. And this time around, he wrote a story in West Africa magazine.
Yes.
That alleged voter fraud, and he was arrested for that one too.
Yes.
And Demba Sambu of the Daily Observer was also arrested in Bansang.
Yes.
And questioned by the NIA.
Yes, we understand that he was the regional correspondent at the time for the Daily Observer down there.
Perhaps allow me to go back to Mbai a little bit. In his last arrest of 21st November 2001, the information received suggests that he was not only detained, but he was tortured and subjected to electrical shocks for 8 days.
Yes, that's very right. In fact, when I was going through my notes this morning, I saw that and I marked it as torture. So it's not part of the incidents of torture that
you had listed.
So we have to, yeah.
That's right. So Ibrahim Asila, BBC correspondent.
Yeah, Ibrahim actually reported about the some misunderstanding between Gambia and Bissau Guinea at the time. We know that the relationship between Jammeh and Kumbayala, who was the president at the time, was not good, to a point that Kumbayala was saying that he was going to wipe off Gambia from the world map. And so Ibrahim was arrested.
And July 2002, Guy Patrick Mosoloka, that's a Congolese guy who worked for Pan-African News Agency. That would be number 36 on your list.
Yes.
And he was, according to your list, arrested and detained incommunicado for 2 weeks. And then 2nd August 2002, 2nd and 3rd August 2002, Usman Dabo, and again Alaji Yoro Jallo, arrested and detained for a story that alleged a marriage between Vice President and her cousin. That's what is listed here.
Yes.
And they get arrested for that too?
Yes, they got arrested for that and then detained, yeah.
On March 2003, Panderi Bai,
Yes.
reporter of the Point, and the dispatch says he was arrested by the police for publication accusing the police of taking bribes from illegal money changers. But he was released same day.
Yes, he was released the same day.
So he's not of the same ilk with Baba Gale Jallo and Alaji Yoro Jallo, who made several trips to NIA and the police. Okay, so Panderi was arrested and released on same day.
Yes.
Was that the reason why he also left? Or?
I'm not sure.
Okay, good. So Alaji Yoro Jallo, again, this time he was arrested and interrogated by the NIA officers over a front page story alleging that 2 Gambian football fans had been killed in Karang, Amdalai.
Yes.
Was the story false? Was he ever prosecuted for that?
He was never prosecuted for that.
On 23rd June 2003, there was a threat of imprisonment to staff of the Independent. Can you tell us about that?
This particular incident was when the Independent published a story about the detention of Yankuba Baji, lieutenant, and then who was the commander of the military camp in Kanilai. Yeah.
And the staff were threatened with imprisonment.
Yeah.
And Abdullah C., editor-in-chief of the Independent, he was questioned together with Alaji Yoro again over the article.
So this actually was the same as the number 41. It was when Salimina came and told them that he wasn't satisfied with the editorial line of Independent. Yeah.
And they got arrested for that.
Yeah.
Simply because he was insatisfied.
Yeah.
They got arrested for that.
Yes.
Interesting. And Buya Jammeh, 9 August 2003.
Yeah. Buya was assaulted by PIU officers while he was at Independent. I think it was outside the premises of Independent.
And Abdullah C., editor-in-chief of the Independent, he was arrested and detained by the NIA in Banjul for 3 days and was allegedly tortured?
Yes. I also, when I was going through my notes this morning as well, I saw this, and this is not also included in the list of tortures. Yeah.
He was not included in the list of tortures. On 2nd October 2003, Lamin Jai of the Independent.
Yeah, Lamin Jai actually had an interview with Wajwara, who said in the story that Jammeh had failed people and that people should take to the streets, and as a result of which he was arrested. Juara, of course, was eventually prosecuted and convicted, but they ended up not charging Lamin, but they used him as a witness. Of course, he was a hostile one, but they used him as a witness.
Interesting. 2nd February 2004, Abdullah C. again. arrested by police in Bundung and transferred to Serekunda police station. And they were arrested for a story in the Independent entitled "Who Owns Kairaba Beach Hotel?" Can you tell us about that?
Yes, I mean, this was a time when information was going around that Jammeh had bought Kairaba Beach Hotel, and then they ran a story about that. But then it was a question mark because I'm sure they didn't have all their facts. But then they were arrested for it. Yeah.
And in this occasion, also he was arrested with Alaji Yorojalo.
Alaji Yorojalo, yeah.
I think he should be given a recognition certificate for being the journalist who stood up most or being most critical in view of the number of arrests he's gone through. I think this is a convenient time to stop. It's time for the lunch, for the first break, and we would continue after the break. We still have about 94 arrests to go through, Mr. Chair.
Thank you very much, Counsel. I think the witness, Counsel and Baba Gale, you all need a 30-minute break after this 90-minute thing in that area. So we will resume in 30 minutes. Meeting is adjourned.